So I wanted to begin this whole process at looking at life in the 60s in Britain and what that was like in terms of culture and especially youth culture and sort of what was going on in society at that time in 1968 in Britain. So I watched a BBC sort of documentary thing called the 60s Season Culture and Fashion of the 60s. And these are some of the notes that I made from that video. American pop music was dominating youth culture. This is a quote. Bringing culture to the masses was seen as a way of breaking down class barriers. Teenage and youth, so not just teenagers, the youth, liked the American biker look. It showed rebellion, and a lot of them seemed to idolise James Dean, who was an actor sort of just a bit before that time. However, they really idolised his look, and because it did show rebellion with leather jackets and different styles of hair. It was very different to generations before's sort of fashion. It was regarded as a culture clash, and there was lots of questioning of establishment. So from this information, I sort of putting it all together, I take that even though I feel like not just sort of the youth as in teenagers, I feel like people of Rita's age in their early 30s would also be classed in this barrier, this bracket. It seems to be a lot of kicking against tradition, all these new ideas coming in which cause this culture clash. And it seems to be that fashion and music had a big influence on the way people acted and the way people thought. And because the music was different and the fashion was different, people were then changing their ideas to suit that. And I concluded that this is actually quite similar to our sort of culture today. We still have, I think, a culture clash between sort of the younger generation and the older, new music, new fashion, and it sort of just kicks against these traditional ideas that as time goes on, more and more of them they just disappear. They don't really class as traditions anymore, as the younger generation just don't use them. And I feel like in terms of linking this to my character of Rita, like I said, although she is in her early 30s, I feel that she would have just being surrounded by this culture of kicking against tradition, and especially the lots of questioning of establishment. At this point in her life, she's looking at helping her children grow up, especially Sharon, her daughter, into a world that is different and that she, like her ideal world, and she is kicking against tradition, saying, I don't want it to carry on the way it is. So I feel like she actually very much fitted into the bracket of what the youth were thinking, sort of teenagers, what they were doing. Although she maybe didn't dress like James Dean and listen to the exact same music, she still had the same ideals as them. And in terms of it being linked to today's society, I think for me, this helps me connect to Rita's character so much more because I'm in that generation of this huge change and just this whole new generation of technology and things like that. And for me, that's, it's a chance for youth today to stand up and have a voice and say what they want to say. They can say it over social media. Regardless of race and sex, you can just go ahead and voice your views. And I feel like Rita was getting to this point where it was becoming more allowed, although women didn't have their rights that they do today. It was becoming more allowed, so she was having that platform to be able to go out and say, this is what we want, this is how we want it, etc. In terms of putting this research into practice, I think it's just looking at the scenes I do with Monty and the important scenes with the management, because these are the times where Rita would have stood up and had her own voice and questioned the establishment, especially scenes with Barbara Castle, where obviously Barbara is of an older generation, she's in Parliament, and Rita's going in and saying these things that they want, and it's new. It's very new to Barbara. So I think it's looking at these scenes and saying, well, this is where Rita's kicking against tradition. This is where she fits into the sort of bracket of the youth, even though she is in her early 30s. And I think that's really important, looking at those scenes, and when we record each rehearsal, look back at how I'm putting that sort of attitude in, the attitude of the youth, into my character, the way I speak, the way I stand towards Barbara, and just see how that differs from now doing the research, and just seeing how that implements into rehearsal.